The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species took their seats. The massive dome above them showed the swirling stars of the galaxy, but today those stars seemed darker, somehow. Ambassador Taemin adjusted his formal diplomatic robes and checked his translation device one more time. He knew this meeting would not go well for humanity. Council Speaker Velteron rose from his crystal platform, his forearms spreading wide in the traditional gesture of gathering. His blue skin shimmered under the artificial lights as he spoke, in the ancient formal tongue that all species understood. We gather today because of disturbing reports from the Outer Rim territories. Reports that concern our newest members of this great alliance. Taemin felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes turning toward him. Some species had multiple eyes, others had compound vision systems, but all of them carried the same expression: fear mixed with curiosity. He had seen that look before during humanity's first contact with galactic civilization 3 years ago. The Vorthak representative, a massive creature with thick gray hide, stood and activated his speaking device. Honorable Council, we must address what happened in the Deneb system last month. The human military response to the pirate attacks was beyond anything we have documented in our databases. So Young stepped forward from the human delegation. As Earth's leading military historian, she had been studying warfare across different species for the past 2 years. Her research had led to some uncomfortable discoveries about her own species. Council Speaker, if I may present our findings. The holographic display in the center of the chamber came to life, showing battle footage from the Deneb incident. The images were grainy but clear enough to see human soldiers moving through a destroyed space station. What made the alien representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats was not what the humans were doing, but how they were doing it. The pirate force numbered approximately 800 individuals, So Young explained as the footage played. Our response team consisted of 43 soldiers. Standard galactic military doctrine suggests a minimum 3-to-1 advantage for assault operations. Humans achieved victory with a 1-to-18 disadvantage. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Altarian delegate, whose species had never lost a battle in their recorded history, made a sound that his translator rendered as disbelief. This must be an error in your calculations. The calculations are correct, Ji-hoon said as he stood. The human psychologist had spent months interviewing soldiers from various species, trying to understand why human military tactics seemed so alien to everyone else. What you are seeing is not superior technology or training. What you are seeing is a fundamental difference in how humans approach combat. The footage continued, showing human soldiers advancing through corridors even after taking what should have been disabling injuries. One soldier continued fighting with a broken arm, using his weapon one-handed while directing his squad with the other. Another soldier, clearly wounded in the leg, used an improvised explosive device to clear a room full of pirates. "Where are their medical evacuation protocols?" asked the Zephyrian observer. His species was known for their strategic brilliance, but even they maintained strict rules about removing wounded soldiers from combat zones. Humans do not evacuate wounded soldiers unless they are completely unable to fight, Ji-hoon explained. Their military doctrine assumes that every individual will continue combat operations until physically incapable of doing so. The chamber fell silent. In galactic military tradition, wounded soldiers were immediately removed from combat and given medical care. It was considered both practical and humane. The idea that a species would expect injured individuals to continue fighting was disturbing to most of the representatives. Veltaran's voice carried a note of concern when he spoke again. "Dr. Ji-hoon, are you suggesting that humans do not value the lives of their soldiers?" "On the contrary," Taemin interjected, rising from his seat. "We value them so highly that we expect them to give everything they have to protect their fellow humans. What you call cruelty, we call dedication." The Carillion delegate, whose species had developed the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy, activated her speaking device. This violates several provisions of the Galactic Warfare Convention. Forcing wounded soldiers to continue fighting is classified as a war crime under Section 12. No one forces our soldiers to do anything, Taemin replied calmly. They choose to continue fighting because they understand what is at stake. So Young brought up another display, this one showing statistical analysis of human combat behavior compared to other species. Our research indicates that humans have a significantly different threshold for what they consider acceptable losses. Most galactic species will withdraw from combat when casualties reach 15 to 20%. Humans have historically continued fighting with casualty rates exceeding 70%. The numbers hung in the air like a dark cloud. Representatives began whispering among themselves in their native languages, and the translation devices filled the chamber with a babble of concerned voices. There must be some mistake, the Fenari delegate said. Her species was known for their peaceful nature and had not engaged in warfare for over 1,000 years. No rational species would accept such losses. That is exactly the point, Ji-hoon said. When humans are threatened, rationality becomes secondary to survival. We do not fight wars the way you do, as political tools with limited objectives. We fight wars as if our entire species depends on the outcome. The Vorthak representative stood again, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. We have additional footage from the Deneb incident. Council Speaker, I request permission to show the final moments of the engagement. The holographic display changed to show the last room of the space station. 3 human soldiers faced more than 30 pirates in what should have been an impossible situation. What happened next would be discussed in galactic military academies for years to come. The humans did not surrender. They did not attempt to negotiate. They did not call for backup or try to escape. Instead, they attacked. The footage showed them using furniture, broken equipment, and even pieces of the damaged station itself as weapons. When their ammunition ran out, they continued fighting with knives. When the knives were lost, they used their bare hands. The time reinforcements arrived, all 3 human soldiers were severely wounded, but they had eliminated every pirate in the room. The final image showed one soldier, bleeding from multiple wounds, still trying to reach for a weapon even though the battle was over. This is the behavior that concerns us, Veltarin said quietly. This is not military tactics as understood by galactic civilization. This is something else entirely. Taemin looked around the chamber at the faces of the alien representatives. He saw fear, confusion, and something that might have been respect. You wanted to know why our response seemed unusual. Now you know. Humans do not surrender. We do not retreat unless tactical advantage requires it. We do not accept defeat as long as we draw breath. The silence that followed was broken by the soft voice of the ethereal delegate, a species so advanced that they rarely spoke in council sessions. What you describe is not warfare. What you describe is extinction-level response behavior. Yes, Ji-hoon said simply. That is exactly what it is. Veltarin raised his 4 arms, calling for formal order. In light of these revelations, I call for an immediate vote on Resolution 2847. All in favor of issuing a formal advisory against military engagement with human forces? The vote was unanimous except for the human delegation, who abstained. As the chamber began to empty, Taemin remained in his seat, knowing that this day had changed everything. The galaxy now knew what humans were capable of, and they were afraid. High Admiral Krixtall of the Zephyrian hegemony studied the tactical display with satisfaction. 200 ships arranged in perfect formation, 50,000 of his finest soldiers ready for deployment, and a target that would send a clear message to the entire galaxy. The human colony of New Busan orbited the star Kepler 442, far from any major shipping lanes or military installations. It would be perfect. Admiral, we are receiving the final intelligence reports on the human defensive capabilities, his aide reported. The young Zephyrian officer looked almost embarrassed as he read from his data pad. 12 ships of mixed civilian and military design, approximately 3,000 ground personnel, most of whom appear to be colonists with minimal military training. Krixtal allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Galactic Council's warning about human military capabilities was clearly the result of panic and misunderstanding. How could a species with such primitive technology and laughable numbers pose any real threat to the mighty Zephyrian military machine? The Council fears ghosts and shadows, he said to his assembled officers. Today we will demonstrate that humans are no different from any other species. They will surrender when faced with overwhelming force, just like everyone else. On the surface of New Busan, Governor Yun-ji stood in the colony's command center watching the same tactical display that showed the approaching Zephyrian fleet. Around her, technicians and administrators worked with quiet efficiency, preparing for what everyone knew would be a completely one-sided battle. Governor, we have received 3 separate evacuation offers from neutral shipping companies, her aide informed her. The last transport could be here within 6 hours. Yun-ji continued, staring at the display. Each red dot represented enemy ships, and there were so many of them that the tactical computer had stopped trying to show individual vessels. Send a message to all evacuation offers. Thank them for their concern, but inform them that New Busan is not accepting refugees. Ma'am, I think there might be a misunderstanding. They are offering to evacuate us, not bring people here. I understood perfectly, Yun-ji replied. We are not leaving. Admiral Yun-woo arrived at the command center 30 minutes later, his uniform still bearing the wrinkles of someone who had been awakened from sleep by emergency alarms. His small fleet was already moving into defensive positions, but everyone in the room knew that 12 ships could not stop 200. What is our status? He asked without preamble. Captain Nara, who commanded the Colonial Defense Force, activated the holographic display showing troop positions around the colony. We have fortified the primary landing zones and established overlapping fields of fire around all critical infrastructure. Engineer Minho has been working with civilian volunteers to create additional defensive positions. How many volunteers? Yun-woo asked. All of them, Nara replied simply. The Admiral raised an eyebrow. All of them? Every adult colonist has volunteered for combat duty. We had to turn away the elderly and anyone under 16. Minho is converting the school into a fortress and the hospital into a command bunker. Hyun-woo walked to the window and looked out at the colony below. He could see civilians moving with purpose, carrying supplies and equipment. Children helped their parents dig trenches. Teachers showed teenagers how to use communications equipment. Even the colony's medical staff were learning to operate heavy weapons. Have any of them asked about evacuation? No, sir, Nara answered. Not one. The Zephyrian fleet arrived in the system 8 hours later, their ships emerging from hyperspace, in a display designed to intimidate any opposition. Krixtal had arranged his forces in a classic intimidation formation, with his largest battleships at the front and smaller vessels spreading out to surround the colony world. Open communications with the human leadership, he ordered. Let us end this before it begins. The communication channel crackled to life and Governor Yun-ji's image appeared on the main screen. She looked completely calm, as if she were attending a routine diplomatic meeting, rather than facing an invasion fleet that outnumbered her defenses 20-1. This is High Admiral Krixtal of the Zephyrian Hegemony. By order of the Hegemony, Council, you are commanded to surrender your weapons and submit to occupation. Comply immediately and no harm will come to your civilian population. Yun-ji listened to the translation with polite attention, then smiled slightly. High Admiral, this is Governor Yun-ji of the New Busan colony. We appreciate your message, but we must respectfully decline your generous offer. There was a moment of silence as Krixtal processed what he had heard. Governor, I do not think you understand your situation. You have 12 ships. I have 200. You have 3,000 soldiers. I have 50,000. Surrender now, and your people will be treated according to galactic law." "I understand our situation perfectly," Yunji replied. "We have evaluated your forces and determined that they are insufficient to take this colony." Krixtal's officers exchanged glances of disbelief. One of them leaned forward and whispered, "Admiral, their calculations must be incorrect. Perhaps they do not understand our numbers." "Governor," Krixtal said slowly, "you are outnumbered more than 15 to 1. Your ships are outdated civilian vessels. Your defenses are minimal. How can you possibly believe you can resist our forces?" "Because you are not fighting soldiers," Yunji said simply. "You are fighting humans." The communication ended, leaving the Zephyrian command bridge in stunned silence. Krixtal stared at the blank screen for several moments before turning to his tactical officer. "Begin the attack. All ships engage the human fleet." The space battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. Admiral Hyunwoo's 12 ships should have been destroyed within minutes by the overwhelming Zephyrian firepower. Instead, they fought like nothing the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Human ships did not retreat when damaged. They did not surrender when outnumbered. They did not follow any recognizable tactical doctrine. Instead, they seemed to view each engagement as an opportunity to inflict maximum damage on the enemy, regardless of the cost to themselves. The human frigate Daegu, commanded by Captain Sojin, continued fighting even after losing its main engines and half its weapon systems. When Zephyrian boarding parties tried to capture the ship, they found the crew had rigged the entire vessel with explosives. Captain Sojin detonated her own ship rather than allow it to be taken, destroying 3 Zephyrian vessels in the process. "What kind of military doctrine authorizes ship commanders to destroy their own vessels?" Krixtal demanded of his intelligence officer. "Admiral, we have no records of any species employing such tactics. Self-destruction to deny enemy capture is theoretically possible, but no military command structure would authorize such extreme measures." The battle continued for 6 hours. When it ended, all 12 human ships had been destroyed, but they had taken 37 Zephyrian vessels with them. The exchange ratio was impossible by all known military mathematics, but the evidence floated in space around them in the form of burning wreckage. "Begin landing operations," Krixtal ordered, trying to maintain his confidence. "The ground assault will proceed as planned." The first wave of Zephyrian troops landed at dawn, expecting to face demoralized defenders after their fleet had been destroyed. Instead, they found something that their training had not prepared them for. The humans were not demoralized. They were angry. Captain Nara led the defense of Landing Zone Alpha with 200 soldiers and 400 civilian volunteers. When the Zephyrian dropships landed, they were met with a level of resistance that defied every tactical manual. In the Hegemony military database, humans did not retreat from superior numbers. They did not seek cover when under heavy fire. They did not follow conventional infantry tactics. Instead, they attacked. Every defensive position became a launching point for counterattacks. Every retreat was actually a flanking maneuver. Every wounded soldier continued fighting until physically unable to do so. Medic Dong Hyun became a legend that day when he continued treating wounded soldiers while under direct enemy fire. When Zephyrian troops tried to target the medical station, Dong Hyun picked up a rifle and returned fire while continuing to perform surgery on a wounded civilian. His actions inspired dozens of other non-combatants to take up weapons and join the fight. "Admiral," his ground commander reported over the communication system, "we are encountering unexpected resistance. The humans are not following standard defensive protocols." "Explain," Krixtal demanded. "They are using tactics we have never seen before. Wounded soldiers refuse medical evacuation and continue fighting. Civilian personnel are engaging our forces with improvised weapons. They have converted every building into a fortress and every street into a kill zone." Kriegstahl studied the tactical display showing his ground forces. The first wave should have secured all major objectives within 2 hours. Instead, his troops were bogged down in brutal street-to-street fighting with no clear progress. Send in the second wave. Double the assault force. Sir, the second wave is already committed. We have deployed our entire ground contingent. The High Admiral stared at the display in growing disbelief. 3 weeks after the first shots were fired over New Busan, High Admiral Kriegstahl stood in his command chamber staring at reports that made no sense. His invasion force of 50,000 soldiers had been reduced to less than 20,000 effective troops. The human colony, which should have fallen in a matter of hours, continued to resist with a ferocity that violated every principle of military science. Admiral, we have received another communication from the human leadership. His communications officer reported with barely concealed nervousness. Put it through, Kriegstahl said, though he dreaded what he might hear. Governor Eunji appeared on the main screen, and Kriegstahl was shocked by what he saw. The human leader looked tired, but completely unbroken. Behind her, he could see the interior of what appeared to be an underground command center. Other humans moved about their duties, with calm efficiency, as if they were not in the middle of a desperate siege. High Admiral, Eunji said, with the same polite tone she had used 3 weeks earlier. We have been monitoring your communications with your superiors. We understand that you are under pressure to achieve victory quickly. Kriegstahl felt his jaw muscles tighten. The humans had been intercepting hegemony military communications, which should have been impossible with their primitive technology. We would like to offer you an opportunity to withdraw your forces with honor, Eunji continued. Your soldiers have fought bravely, and we respect their courage. However, we cannot allow this invasion to continue. You cannot allow? Kriegstahl sputtered. You are surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from all outside support. What makes you think you are in a position to offer terms? Eunji smiled slightly, and something in that expression made the Zephyrian admiral deeply uncomfortable. Because, High Admiral, you have not been fighting the New Busan Colonial Defense Force. You have been fighting a small portion of it while we prepared our real response. The communication ended, leaving Kriegstahl staring at a blank screen. Before he could process what the human governor had meant, alarms began sounding throughout his flagship. Admiral, we are detecting massive energy. Signatures from the planet's surface, his sensor officer reported. Multiple launches detected. Configuration unknown. What emerged from New Busan's atmosphere was not a fleet of military vessels. Instead, hundreds of improvised spacecraft rose from hidden launch sites scattered across the colony. Engineer Min Ho had spent 3 weeks converting civilian shuttles, cargo haulers, and mining equipment into weapons of war. The improvised human fleet should have been destroyed easily by the Zephyrian ships. The civilian craft had minimal armor, basic weapons, and pilots who had learned to fly in combat simulators. But once again, human tactics defied conventional military wisdom. The civilian pilots did not attempt to engage in traditional space combat. Instead, they swarmed the Zephyrian vessels like angry insects, using their superior numbers and suicidal bravery to overwhelm enemy defenses. Mining ships rammed battlecruisers. Cargo haulers used their loading equipment to board enemy vessels. Passenger shuttles loaded with explosives turned themselves into guided missiles. They are using their own civilians as weapons, Kriegstahl's tactical officer said in horror. This violates every principle of civilized warfare. No, Kriegstahl replied quietly, finally beginning to understand what they were facing. They are not using civilians as weapons. There are no civilians. Every human on that planet is a soldier. On the planet's surface, General Seung-ho had implemented what human military doctrine called total defense. Every adult colonist had been assigned a military role. Every building had been converted into a defensive position. Every piece of equipment had been modified for warfare. The distinction between soldier and civilian had completely disappeared. Captain Nara led an assault team through the Zephyrian lines using tactics that would have been considered impossible by galactic military standards. Her soldiers advanced, through heavy enemy fire without seeking cover, trusting their body armor and medical technology to keep them fighting. When soldiers were wounded, they continued their advance. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they picked up enemy weapons and continued fighting. "Captain, we have breached the enemy command post," Sergeant J. Wu reported over the communication system. "The Zephyrian officers are requesting terms for surrender." "Negative," Nara replied immediately. "No prisoners until the orbital bombardment stops." The Zephyrian ground commander, Colonel Vextar, found himself in an impossible situation. His forces were being systematically destroyed by human tactics that seemed to ignore basic concepts like self-preservation and tactical withdrawal. When his soldiers were wounded, they were evacuated according to proper military procedure. When human soldiers were wounded, they kept fighting. "I request permission to begin tactical withdrawal to secondary positions," he reported to Krixtal. "Denied," the High Admiral replied. "We cannot afford to show weakness to these primitives." "Sir, with respect, they are not primitives. They are something else entirely." While the battle raged on New Busan, news of the conflict had spread throughout the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, xenobiologists and military analysts struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Dr. Yuna, a human scientist working on a neutral research station, found herself answering increasingly desperate questions from alien colleagues. Dr. Yuna, her Altarian colleague, asked during an emergency conference, "We need to understand human military doctrine. Your people are fighting in ways that our databases classify as impossible." Yuna activated her holographic display and showed tactical analysis from the New Busan conflict. "You are making a fundamental error in your analysis. You assume that humans fight wars the same way other species do, as political tools with limited objectives." "How else would one fight a war?" asked the Carillion representative. "For survival," Yuna replied simply. "When humans are threatened, we do not fight to achieve political goals. We fight to eliminate the threat completely and permanently." The alien scientists exchanged glances of growing concern. "Are you saying that humans view this colonial skirmish as a threat to your entire species?" "No," Yuna said quietly. "I am saying that humans view any military attack as a potential threat to our species. We do not distinguish between small conflicts and large ones. We respond to all threats as if our survival depends on victory." On New Busan, the conflict had evolved into something that military historians would later classify as asymmetric warfare, taken to its logical extreme. Hei Wan, a former teacher who now commanded a resistance cell, had organized the colony's children into an intelligence network that provided real-time information about Zephyrian troop movements. "The enemy is moving heavy equipment toward the agricultural district," 12-year-old Kyung-min reported over his communication device. 3 vehicles, 20 soldiers, heading south on Route 7. Hei Wan acknowledged the report and dispatched a team to intercept the Zephyrian forces. The team consisted of a medical technician, 2 engineers, and a botanist, all of whom had learned military tactics over the past 3 weeks. They set up an ambush using improvised explosives and captured enemy weapons. Teacher Hai Wan, one of her fighters, asked as they prepared the ambush, "Do you think the Zephyrians understand what they started?" "No," she replied while checking her rifle. "They think they are fighting a war. They do not understand that they declared war on the human species." The ambush was successful, eliminating the entire Zephyrian patrol without human casualties. Hei Wan's team recovered enemy equipment and intelligence, then disappeared back into the underground tunnel network that connected every building in the colony. In orbit, Krixtal received reports of the lost patrol with growing frustration. His forces were being defeated not by superior technology or numbers, but by an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable rules of engagement. Admiral, we are receiving a priority communication from Hegemony Command, his communications officer reported. The face of Supreme Admiral Dextar appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. Admiral Crixtal, explain to me how a simple demonstration against a minor human colony has turned into a full-scale military disaster. Sir, the humans are not fighting according to conventional military doctrine, Crixtal replied. They are using tactics that we have never encountered before. What tactics could possibly account for your failure to defeat 3,000 colonists with 50,000 professional soldiers? Crixtal took a deep breath before answering. They do not surrender, sir. They do not retreat. They do not distinguish between military and civilian targets because they do not distinguish between military and civilian personnel. Every human on that planet is fighting as if the survival of their entire species depends on holding this one. Colony. Supreme Admiral Dextar was silent for several moments. Admiral, are you telling me that humans fight wars differently than other civilized species? Yes, sir. I am telling you that humans do not fight wars at all. They fight for extinction, either ours or theirs. The communication ended, leaving Crixtal alone with reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. His invasion force was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should have been helpless. More disturbing still, the emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called after reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. What had started as a minor border incident had escalated into something that terrified every civilized species in known space. Ambassador Chang Min arrived at the council chambers with a delegation that included military advisors, xenobiologists, and something new that made other representatives nervous: a human war council. Council Speaker Veltaran opened the session with an unprecedented breach of protocol. Instead of the traditional formal greeting, he went straight to the crisis at hand. The situation with the Zephyrian-human conflict has spiraled beyond all projections. We have received reports from 17 different star systems of human military mobilization. This is no longer a colonial dispute. The Vorthak representative, his massive frame trembling with what his translator rendered as concern, activated his speaking device. Honorable Council, we must address the reports coming from the conflict zone. Our military observers have documented human combat behavior that violates every known principle of civilized warfare. Ambassador Chang Min rose from his seat with the calm confidence that other species had learned to associate with dangerous situations. Council Speaker, we appreciate the opportunity to address these concerns. However, we must clarify something important. The Zephyrian hegemony did not attack a human military installation. They attacked human civilians. This changes the nature of our response. How does it change anything? Demanded the Altarian delegate. Military engagement follows the same protocols regardless of the target. Not for humans, Chang Min replied. Simply Dr. In Su, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stepped forward to address the council. Her research over the past month had revealed disturbing truths about human evolution that other species had not fully understood. Honorable Council, we need to discuss the fundamental differences between human psychology and that of other galactic species. The holographic display activated, showing comparative brain scans of different species. Most galactic civilizations evolved from prey species or pack hunters with strict social hierarchies. Humans evolved from persistence predators with tribal social structures. This creates fundamentally different responses to threats. The Carillion delegate, whose species had developed the most advanced understanding of interspecies psychology, leaned forward with interest. Dr. Insu, are you suggesting that humans have different threat assessment protocols? I am saying that humans do not assess threats the way other species do. When most species encounter a threat, they evaluate the cost-benefit ratio of engagement versus withdrawal. Humans evaluate threats in terms of survival versus extinction. A murmur of unease rippled through the chamber. The implications of what the human scientist was saying began to sink in among the various representatives. The attack on New Busan was intended as a limited demonstration of force, Insu continued. But humans do not recognize the concept of limited force. Any attack on human civilians is perceived as an attempt at genocide. Our response is calibrated accordingly. At that moment, urgent reports began arriving from across the galaxy. War correspondent Su Jin had been broadcasting from the front, lines of multiple conflicts, and her footage was being distributed to every major news network in civilized space. The images that appeared on the Council's main display showed scenes that would haunt galactic civilization for generations to come. Human soldiers advancing through enemy fire without seeking cover. Human civilians converting their homes into weapons factories. Human children learning to operate military equipment alongside their parents. This is footage from the Kepler 442. System 12 hours ago, Su Jin's voice narrated over the images. What you are seeing is not a military force. What you are seeing is an entire species preparing for war. The Council watched in stunned silence as the footage showed human colonies throughout the sector mobilizing for conflict. Every civilian ship had been converted into a military vessel. Every civilian facility had been transformed into a military installation. Every human civilian had become a potential combatant. Council Speaker, the ethereal delegate said in their rarely heard voice, "We are not observing conventional military mobilization. We are observing species-wide survival response behavior." Supreme Admiral Dex Tar of the Zephyrian hegemony appeared via holographic communication, his proud demeanor replaced by something approaching panic. Honorable Council, I request immediate intervention in the conflict with human forces. The Bao. Situation has exceeded all tactical parameters. Explain your situation, Supreme Admiral, Velteran demanded. My forces are being systematically destroyed by an enemy that does not follow any recognizable military doctrine. Human combatants do not surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. They do not retreat when tactical advantage is lost. They do not distinguish between military and civilian personnel in their own ranks. The Supreme Admiral paused, struggling to find words for what his forces had encountered. They fight as if every engagement is their final battle. They accept casualty, rates that would force any civilized military to surrender, and they continue fighting until physically incapable of doing so. Philosopher Wu Jin, representing Earth's diplomatic corps, stepped forward to address the Council. Supreme Admiral, what you describe is not unusual behavior for humans. What you have encountered is standard human military doctrine when civilian populations are threatened. Standard doctrine? Dextar's voice carried a note of disbelief. Your soldiers continue fighting with injuries that would incapacitate warriors from any other species. Your civilians attack military forces with improvised weapons. Your children participate in combat operations. Yes, Wu Jin replied calmly. That is correct. The silence that followed was broken by the Fenari delegate, whose species had not engaged in warfare for over a millennium. This violates every principle of civilized conflict resolution. There must be rules of engagement that protect non-combatants. There are, Wu Jin agreed. The rules are simple. Do not attack human civilians, and we will not demonstrate why the Galactic Council issued their warning. Reports continued to arrive from the conflict zones, each one more disturbing than the last. Human forces had begun using tactics that other species classified as impossible or insane. Military units continued fighting even when cut off from all support. Individual soldiers fought on with injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. Civilian populations had converted entire worlds into fortress systems. We have received additional intelligence from our observers in the Kepler 442 system, the Vorthak representative reported. The humans have begun modifying their own physiology to enhance combat effectiveness. The holographic display showed medical scans of human soldiers who had undergone surgical procedures to improve their fighting capabilities. Enhanced reflexes, improved healing, increased pain tolerance. modifications that other species would consider barbaric violations of their own bodies. Dr. Insu, Veltaran asked quietly, are humans willing to permanently alter themselves for military advantage? When threatened with extinction, humans will do whatever is necessary to survive. Physical modification is considered acceptable if it increases survival probability. The council chamber fell silent as representatives began to truly understand what they were dealing with. Humans did not fight wars the way civilized species did, as political tools with limited objectives. Humans fought wars as if their species' survival depended on complete victory. Military strategist Jun Seo, representing Earth's War College, activated his own holographic display, showing tactical analysis from the ongoing conflicts. Honorable Council, we need to address a fundamental misunderstanding about human military capabilities. What misunderstanding? Demanded the Zephyrian Supreme Admiral. You assume that what you have encountered represents the full extent of human military capability. It does not. What you have fought is colonial defense forces with minimal training and improvised equipment. The implications of that statement hit the Council like a physical blow. If undertrained colonial militias could devastate professional military forces, what could actual human military units accomplish? The forces defending New Busan consist of civilian volunteers with 3 weeks of combat experience, Jun Seo continued. They have no formal military training, no standardized equipment, and no professional command structure. They are fighting with converted civilian equipment and improvised tactics. Impossible, Dextar protested. No civilian force could achieve what we have witnessed. You are correct, Jun Seo agreed. No civilian force from any other species could achieve what you have witnessed, but you are not fighting civilians from another species. You are fighting humans. Ambassador Chang Min rose to address the Council one final time. Honorable delegates, we appear before you today not to seek mediation or compromise. We appear before you to ensure that the galaxy understands what the Zephyrian hegemony has initiated. What have they initiated? Veltaran asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. They have attacked human civilians, Chang Min replied. In human culture, this means they have declared their intention to commit genocide against our species. Our response will be proportional to that threat. What does that mean? The war ended not with a great final battle, but with a simple communication from the Zephyrian High Command to Supreme Commander Gite of the Human Defense Forces. High Admiral Crixtail, his fleet reduced to less than 30 functional vessels, sent a message that would be remembered throughout galactic history for its brevity and absolute surrender. Human Command. This is High Admiral Crixtail of the Zephyrian Hegemony. We request immediate cessation of hostilities and offer unconditional surrender of all forces under my command. Supreme Commander Gite stood in the bridge of the flagship, Seoul, studying tactical displays that showed human forces in complete control of 7 star systems that had belonged to the Zephyrian hegemony just 6 weeks earlier. Around him, his staff worked with the quiet efficiency that other species had learned to associate with human military operations. Admiral Crixtail, Gite replied over the open communication channel, your surrender is acknowledged. All Zephyrian military personnel will be processed according to galactic law. Your civilian populations will not be harmed. The relief in... Crixtail's voice was obvious, even through the translation device. Thank you, Supreme Commander. I must ask for my own understanding what would have happened if we had not surrendered. Gite was quiet for a moment before answering. Admiral, you attacked human civilians. If you had not surrendered, we would have continued fighting until the Zephyrian hegemony no longer existed as a political entity. You would have committed genocide? No, Gite replied. We would have eliminated your military capability and occupied your territory until we were certain you could never threaten human civilians again. Your people would have been relocated to reservation worlds under human supervision. The communication ended. leaving Krixtal to contemplate what his demonstration of force had nearly cost his entire species. 3 days later, Earth's chief diplomat, Ah Young, stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council to address the aftermath of the shortest and most decisive war in galactic history. The chamber was filled with representatives who looked at the human delegation with a mixture of respect and barely concealed fear. "Honorable Council," Ah Young began, "we appear before you today to discuss the future of human participation in galactic civilization. Recent events have raised questions about humanity's place in the galactic community." Council Speaker Veltaran leaned forward in his crystal chair. "Chief Diplomat, the Council has received disturbing reports about human military capabilities. We need to understand what the galaxy witnessed during the Zephyrian conflict." Dr. Mi Young, Earth's leading expert on interspecies ethics, activated the holographic display to show analysis of the recent war. The conflict demonstrated fundamental differences between human military doctrine and that of other galactic species. We need to address these differences openly and honestly. "What differences?" asked the Carillion delegate, whose species had been studying the war's aftermath with growing concern. "Most galactic species fight wars to achieve political objectives," Mi Young explained. "Territory, resources, influence. Humans fight wars to eliminate existential threats. When the Zephyrian hegemony attacked New Busan, they did not declare war on a human colony, they declared war on the human species." The Altarian representative, whose own species had never lost a military engagement in their recorded history, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Chief Diplomat, are you saying that humans cannot distinguish between local conflicts and species-wide threats?" "I am saying that humans do not choose to make that distinction when civilian populations are involved," Ah Young replied. "Any attack on human civilians is treated as an act of genocide, regardless of the attacker's stated intentions." Military analyst Dae Ho stepped forward to address the tactical implications of what the Council had witnessed. "Honorable delegates, we need to discuss the strategic reality that this conflict has revealed. Human military doctrine is fundamentally different from what your databases classify as possible." "Explain," Veltaran demanded. "Human soldiers do not retreat when faced with superior numbers. They do not surrender when tactical advantage is lost. They do not distinguish between military and civilian personnel when their own species is threatened. Most importantly, they do not accept defeat as long as any human remains capable of fighting." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. What Dae Ho was describing was not military strategy as understood by galactic civilization. It was species survival behavior taken to its logical extreme. "The New Busan colony had 3,000 residents," Dae Ho continued. "All 3,000 became combatants when attacked. They converted every building into a fortress, every tool into a weapon, every civilian skill into a military capability. They fought as if the survival of humanity depended on holding that one colony." President Young Hee, representing Earth's civilian government, rose to address the deeper implications of what the galaxy had witnessed. "Honorable Council, we need to discuss why Resolution 2847 was issued in the first place. The warning was never about human aggression or territorial ambition." "What was it about?" asked the Fenari delegate. "It was about human survival instinct," Young Hee replied. "When humans perceive an existential threat, we do not fight to win. We fight to ensure that the threat can never emerge again." Veterans Representative Jun Woo activated his own display, showing psychological profiles of human soldiers from the recent conflict. "Council members, you have expressed concern about human military capabilities. We need you to understand something important about these capabilities." "What do we need to understand?" Veltaran asked. "Every human soldier who fought in this war was a volunteer. Every civilian who took up arms chose to do so. Every person who participated in combat operations made a conscious decision to risk their life to protect other humans. The alien representatives exchanged glances of growing unease. The idea that an entire species would voluntarily participate in warfare was disturbing to civilizations that relied on professional military forces. More importantly, Junwoo continued, every one of these individuals can return to civilian life immediately after the conflict ends. Human soldiers do not require psychological conditioning to function in society after combat. We separate personal morality from species survival. Medical Officer Tae-young addressed the Council's concerns about human modifications during combat. Several delegates have expressed concern about human willingness to modify their own bodies for military advantage. We need to clarify the ethical framework that governs these decisions. What ethical framework allows such modifications? Demanded the ethereal delegate. When human survival is threatened, individual comfort becomes secondary to species survival. Humans will accept physical modification, psychological conditioning, and technological integration if it increases their probability of protecting other humans. The council chamber buzzed with nervous conversation as representatives began to truly understand what they were dealing with. Humans did not fight wars the way other species did. They fought for survival, and they were willing to sacrifice anything, including their own humanity, to ensure that survival. Ambassador Tai Min, who had witnessed the original council warning 6 months earlier, rose to deliver humanity's final statement to the galactic community. Honorable delegates, we want to address the future of human participation in galactic civilization. What future do you envision? Veltarin asked carefully. Humans want to be part of the galactic community, Taemin said simply. We want to trade, explore, learn, and grow alongside other species. We want to contribute to galactic civilization and benefit from the knowledge and friendship of other races. But, prompted the council speaker, sensing there was more. But, we want the galaxy to understand what happens if any species threatens human civilians again. The Zephyrian conflict demonstrated human military capabilities under favorable conditions. We were defending a single colony with minimal resources and no preparation time. Taemin paused to let that sink in before continuing. If any species forces humans to fight for our species' survival, they will face the full capability of human civilization. Not colonial militias with improvised weapons, but the combined military and industrial capacity of every human world, backed by the survival instinct of 8 billion people who refused to accept extinction. The silence that followed was broken by Veltarin's formal pronouncement. The Galactic Council hereby recognizes Resolution 2847 as binding galactic law. No member species shall engage in military action against human civilian populations under any circumstances. Furthermore, he continued, the Council establishes the Human Protection Protocol. Any species that threatens human civilians will be considered to have declared war against the entire galactic community. As the session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, many of them cast nervous glances at the human delegation. They had learned something about humanity that would change galactic civilization forever. Humans were not conquerors or aggressors. They were not interested in expanding their territory or dominating other species, but they were apex, predators who had evolved on a world where survival required the complete elimination of existential threats.